Daniel, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
I suppose to begin, could you further introduce yourself and maybe give the audience a little bit more of a background on who you are?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. You might have seen me over on Twitter. I've been active for the last month. But just to give you a brief introduction to my background, I studied finance in England, and my first job was in Barclays Bank back in 2006, which was in accounting. And funnily enough, in 2008, it's probably quite an iconic time. I got headhunted to work for JP Morgan down in their bullion back office. Now, their back office, not in London, it was actually in Bournemouth. And I got the call to go work for them. I actually started the weekend after they bought out Bear Stearns, and this was the first time I think gold made the run to 1,200 and sort of silver 20. So you can only imagine as I walked into the floor, basically, you can imagine the pandemonium at height of just at the start of the financial crisis. So I first started at JP Morgan in the operations in the sort of local London clearing, and that's pretty much my history. I've worked for HSBC and I've worked for ICBC Standard Bank. That's the new Chinese entity that's coming to market.
Mm-hmm. So it's ever since 2008, you've had your hand and been deep involved with precious metals. It sounds like...
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to clarify. I wasn't a trader. My background is I've worked in the operations and sort of risk side. So it was basically in the back office. So I would get to see and manage all the flows coming through. I would just like to clarify, I wasn't actually a trader.
Okay.
But I was more on the analytical side of the local London clearing.
Well, that's great. It's the March 2008 start point with JP Morgan is really interesting. Obviously, they needed new staffing because they had taken over Bear Stearns' failed position. Just a little bit further detail on that. I mean, if you were in the back office, obviously you didn't see all the details, but from what you gather, those 3 years being in there, you had a price run up to $21 in the spring, and then flushing down to $9 at the lows in silver. Gold eclipsed 1,000, like you had mentioned, and plunged back down to 700 during the financial crisis. And then there was, on our side in the United States, in the retail wholesale market, there was a big shortage of silver and gold bullion products. Literally, there were days where we didn't have any silver products to sell and only one or two gold products, and back orders were weeks in advance, and so there was huge premiums as well for people to get product. So I just want to get a little bit further detail on what you saw in those 3 years, especially in those calamitous times that we're talking about, like from 2008, 2009.
Yeah. So the first year was sort of a baptism of fire. You can imagine the first. It was actually probably lucky. I'm probably lucky that I actually even had a job to go into, because that was at a time when people were getting job offers in 2008 in the banks, and they were just getting told on Monday, just don't bother coming in. So I was actually quite happy at the time that they actually kept their promise, because a lot of these banks were just shedding staff left, right, and centre. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the first day it was pretty crazy. Obviously, the phones are pretty mad. My manager couldn't really train me because obviously he was so busy taking calls, obviously because of Bear Stearns at the weekend. Mm-hmm. He just goes to me, and this is quite a key thing for your listeners. He said to me that the first job I had to do on the Monday morning, he said, just log into Bullion Desk or Kitco and get gold and silver prices. Now, I know nothing about, this is a time I knew nothing about gold, absolutely nothing. Silver, I actually come from an accounting background, straight out of wealth management at Barclays. And I just logged onto the site and I saw the price of $1,000 for gold and $20 for silver. And I actually turned around to my boss, and I've always remembered this at times I've been looking at this. I said to him, why is silver so cheap? And he looked at me and he goes, silver's gone up from $12 to $20. This was I don't know if you remember the back end, this would have been potentially the back end of 2007 when silver had a big run up to 21. That's the first big run. Mm-hmm. But what I always remember, this is probably a good test, perhaps someone to do it on YouTube, I think Mark Dice has done something very similar. Best test is just perhaps to go up to someone who knows nothing about the price of gold and silver, but intrinsically has a relationship between the two. tell them for me, this would be a good test. Just tell them the gold price, give them the price. It's 1,300. Tell me what the silver price is. I bet you any money you'd get a number between 200 and 600. Some people might think they're the same. If no one knows, if they knew nothing about silver, if you told them the gold price was 1,300, I'll be surprised if anyone gets close to 16 bucks.
That would be a fun street test. I think you're right. It would be it would be a small percentage that would even guess silver below 50 bucks probably if they have no clue what the price is, with the gold price being around 13.
Yeah, and this is the thing, like, you know, even as kids we get, even the money in our pocket, it's not real money, right? Even like, so in England here, we have the pound coins. It looks like a gold coin. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's no gold in it, but we have like the silver 50 pence piece, mm-hmm. 20 pence piece, and, so intrinsically, or logically in our head, it's built in us that, one's worth a pound and one's worth like equivalent 10 cents. So you're getting the sort of ratio in your head of sort of 10 to 1 that's given you from your government. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, no, sorry, I think I'm going off course a little bit, but I think that would be an interesting test, I think. No,
it's totally important, and I think it makes a good point. But the trial by fire, where the phone's not where the phone's just ringing off the hook, and you're not getting trained by your manager because it's so busy. I had the same experience in 2008 when I walked into the industry basically in August, and it was the same scenario, just kind of learning it by doing it. Didn't really have that much in terms of everyone was so busy. It couldn't be trained thoroughly as maybe it would have been in a calm market.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and in the bullion market, and probably in the same with all sort of departments at the time, there was real fear on the street. Like this is at a time when we would actually settle the trade. So if you think like a gold trade, is one side's in dollars and one side in gold. We're actually settling those trades. So we'd get calls throughout the day and people are saying, have we got our gold? And then someone would say, well, I can't give you the gold until you give me dollars. And then they're saying, well, I can't give you dollars until you give us gold. And there was a complete lack of trust that actually happened back in 2008, where there was almost a standoff. And that was like, and then there was some entities with each other. They didn't want to give their gold until they got dollars. And it was a very difficult situation to manage. And I'm actually, as much as like say, listen, I'm very surprised that it was managed to sort of be held together, to be honest.
Right. Yeah. That's trust is number one, especially when people are doubting whether or not someone's, bankrupt or whether or not they're fully funded and still able to operate a business. Okay. So moving on, the local London side of the business was where you went to next. Can you explain for our listeners out there a little bit about the local London market, how it differs perhaps from other markets?
Yeah, okay. So the best way to describe Loco London is it's basically a collection of your big bullion banks. So it's basically bullion banks in London trading with each other. Now, historically, that used to be JP Morgan, HSBC, Barclays, Deutsche, Scotia, UBS. Quite recently, a couple have pulled out, and the Chinese entity have come in. But it's a small club of bullion banks, and how they trade is called OTC trading, which is essentially it's not reported by an exchange. Basically, it's basically one bank calling up another bank and doing a trade. Most of the time, that would be obviously facilitating their own clients. I think JP Morgan and HSBC are the two biggest. They have the most clients. But yeah, it's a way to manage sort of gold flows, and there's a key point with Loco London. There's two types of gold you can get. You can get unallocated gold, which is essentially like a book entry credit, very similar to essentially someone crediting your account at Chase with dollars. You're essentially how to describe it, like
an unsecured creditor.
Absolutely, they owe you basically. It's a very similar. Now, there's obviously allocated movement as well. But it's fair to say, the vast majority of sort of trade flows that are moving through London is on that sort of paper, much reported unallocated. Yes, correct.
Wow. So the sheer volumes of trading that go on, as far as dollar amounts, it always dwarfs the amount of actual gold and silver that's being mined day to day or year to year. Correct?
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes. So the sheer
there's no way of even contesting that. even the numbers that we get from I don't know if you're familiar, the LBMA, they actually report clearing statistics. We get some numbers from them, and even their numbers would dwarf it. Now the thing that I would like to add on that, the numbers that we get from LBMA on a net basis, so that would actually underreport. So say for example, Bank A and Bank B, they do 100 trades, and the net might only be like one flow. They might do all these trades backwards and forwards, but Loco London will only settle the net flow. So out of those trades, who owes what? It would be the net flow. So I mean, some banks do report gross figures, but that's for me another reason I think there's no real way of knowing the sort of true volume.
And just to dig down into this, what is the ultimate motivation of these trades, do you think? Is it client based or is it other things?
My personal opinion, just my view, this is not based on anything. The vast majority of those trades are client trades. This is my own view. I'll tell you for why. It was much reported that a lot of the prop desks closed 2008. The prop trading, the prop traders, the prop staff, just there's no appetite really. I don't think for sort of prop trading. I think the vast majority of it's client led, and really they're in the business of making money on the day. They're not really, my personal opinion, I don't think they're interested in making that sort of money in the long term. They just want to lock in profit every day if they get it. If they're long or short in the morning, they want to hedge out that risk and lock in the profit. But this is just me postulating. Who knows? I mean, like I say, you've got all the COMEX positions, which is probably a third, and you've got all of the OTC London that we just talked about, which is another third. But another factor we've not talked about is all the stuff that doesn't settle local London. That's the OTC derivatives. These are options that banks might do with each other. So there's no real way of knowing sort of the true position, who's actually net, who's long and who's short. There's no real way, just sort of say.
Right. It's a very opaque market. I totally get it. To understand the motivations of all the players is something you'd have to be an omniscient god to be able to do.
Yeah. And this is the thing, like I know that there's one entity that's heavily long sort of silver in the COMEX, but no one really knows what their true position is, and are they long and short London? Are they long and short derivative market? There's no real way of knowing. You don't know. The other entities that may have tiny positions, they may have something elsewhere. So it's a bit of a guessing game.
Yeah, and if you won't say it, I will. I think he's referring to JP Morgan, which is, I think currently the COMEX warehouse is 143 million ounces as of this week. So moving along, I see that you're relatively newcomer on Twitter. That's how I found you. I've been watching your tweets, and they've been rather good. I wanted to. There was one that you went into. You were discussing the complexities of markets like the EFP market currently. And for those out there who don't know, the exchange for physical is a relatively new phenomenon. I think it started in 2015, but in the last few years, it's gone hyperbolic in the sense of how much it's moving. And so maybe if we could start from the ground up and kind of explain what the EFP or exchange for physical. Others have laughed at it and called it exchange for paper. But if we could start,
probably a good analogy. That's probably a good start, to be honest. You're correct. So the exchange for physical is like a hybrid product based between New York COMEX and London unallocated or physical maybe. But essentially, it's a way of doing a swap. So, say for example, if you're long in the COMEX along 1,000 ounces, you would enter into a short London and vice versa. It's essentially a means of swapping your position, basically. I mean, that in theory, it's supposed to be a means of actually taking delivery on another exchange. But I got a funny feeling most of the time it's used for the purpose of sort of hedging out between the two exchanges.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the relative growth in the last few years, do you have any ideas to what is going on? Why is it getting so much larger, the EFP market?
Yeah, it's funny actually, because the relative sort of the growth in the growth in these sort of products is something that's happened since I've left the industry. But I had a bit of think about it the last few days, and it's something I haven't seen sort of been mentioned too often. And I'm sure people can reply to me in a few days' time and tell me that I'm wrong. But basically, I mean, if we can comment on the fact what we know that there's a huge physical demand in Asia. There's a huge appetite for kilo bars. Okay, and a lot of these clients will have accounts with bullion banks. So my take on it is I'm pretty sure that they're looking at the catalyst for these EFP numbers. Is they'll phone up the bullion bank, they'll place an order. All of a sudden, the bullion bank will then have a position it needs to get rid of. Now, what would usually happen a few years ago is that bullion bank would then, for a process called TOMNEX, which is like settling their trades the next day, call up another bank, local London, over the counter, and just be done with it. You've got your risk, just get rid of it. But as has been reported, there's many banks in London that essentially pulled out precious metal. Had Deutsche pull out, had Barclays pull out, Scotia's completely scaling down, and Mitsui. I mean, Mitsui are around sort of 50, 60 years, and they just basically gone. So my thinking is that the growth, that basically they can't hedge out their position in London, and they're looking to sort of go to brokers and hedge out that risk in COMEX. Now, obviously the numbers, they correlate. I saw something recently, it might be from Craig, I saw something that the numbers annualized, you're sort of looking at sort of 8,000 tonnes. We know the numbers in Asia are big, but they're not 8,000 tonnes. My thinking is that the physical demand is the catalyst. And then once the bank tries to cover that position, that creates a position with someone else, and they'll go backwards and forwards until they sort of net each other out. And again, whilst this may be completely legitimate, we don't know what this extra sort of volume is doing to sort of the price discovery, and that's my key point. But just to summarise, I'm pretty certain there could be a link there between EFP numbers and the declining bullion banks pulling out of London. I think there's a link there, because essentially you're taking away something you can trade with. I mean, if you can imagine, in the morning you'd have, must have been 5 years ago, you had like 70 or 80 traders, but now with 4 banks on, you're sort of losing that liquidity. All of a sudden you've got like half that amount of 50 banks you can trade with. So unless you get in there quick in the morning and flatten out your exposure, you're not going to be able to get rid of that. And the only way they can do that is call up their broker and hedge it out in COMEX. That's my thinking. I could be completely wrong, but it'd be interesting to see whether there's a continual relationship between EFP growth and potentially more people pulling out. And I want to make one last point, actually, is this is the key thing. This is the key thing for me, is that there's 2 things happening in the bullion market, and this is the 2 reasons that many of the banks are pulling out. Number one, they're not making any money. There's just no appetite from the clients, so they've got basically falling client revenue. Number 2, not only have they got falling revenue, they've actually got the increased cost of regulation. You only have to see the sort of amount of red tape, the KYC, the compliance. Banks being fined, Deutsche was fined, Barclays being fined. So bullion banking for the moment is just not a good place for them to be. They're not making money in client revenue, and obviously they have to pay the extra sort of costs for oversight. So yeah, I think it's an interesting development, but I personally think the industry is eating itself from the inside out.
Wow. As far as you'd mentioned Craig Hemke. He's been on this topic, writing about it a lot of late. I think we've hosted some of his articles at silverdoctors.com. So yeah, hat tip to him. He's been on this story for a few years now, and he's been on the precipice. But it's great to hear from your side, because you obviously have experience in London, and so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, for me there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't want to be like all doom and gloom, and I do think that there's way forward. Now, for me, I don't know. I was just talking about London, all the sort of transactions that happen between the London bullion banks. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned, but the way that they operate is through a system called Aurum. Aurum's the hub, basically. Aurum contains all the transactions, all of the physical movements, all of the brokers' transfers. Now, this system has been going for maybe 15, 16 years, a system called Aurum, and it's been held together by pieces of sticky tape. Now, the way we move forward, and I don't know if you saw it, but a few years ago, a couple of the other smaller banks tried to trial blockchain technology into the post-settlement space. Now, if this is the ultimate goal for Loco London Clearing, to sort of open up the opaqueness and actually get some transparency. If Aurum basically can be onto a public ledger, and it should be something like blockchain, that is how it moves forward. Will that happen? I don't know. But for me, it was interesting. I might send you, I don't know if I'll send you a link. There was smaller banks, not the bullion banks, but the real high up ones, but the actual sort of members of these other banks. They were trialing with Euroclear. I don't know if you ever saw the story, and actually the project got canned 2 years ago. Did you read that one?
Yeah, I did. I saw your graph that you made, and I saw the tweets that you made on the subject.
Yeah, whether, it's interesting. I mean, potentially it was obviously too soon, because this is the problem with Aurum. There's so many sort of manual pieces to do. I mean, public ledger is just straightforward transactions going in and out. Obviously, when you've got the sort of manual process involved, it's going to be quite a big shift. But for me, to open up the market, if it was on a public ledger, that's how you move forward, because essentially it's all there to be seen, right? We can only guess on the numbers, but if all the transactions are there on a public ledger, then that's how for me it's how it moves forward.
Yeah. And as far as moving forwards, you had mentioned a little bit about, obviously Chinese kilobar demand and how voracious that appetite has been for, 5, 6, 8 years now. Obviously the kilo, 5 bar is now the standard in the world as far as delivery size. It's no longer the 400 ounce central bank gold bar. It's the 32.15 ounce kilo bar that people want, especially in Shanghai Gold Exchange. As far as the longer term future and like looking out 5-10 years, where do you see this all headed as far as bullion markets in general?
I think eventually there'll be a power, and I've talked about this. I think I've actually had a few conversations with David. I think you might have had him before, David Jensen. I've spoken to him on Twitter, and I was basically saying that it just needs a paradigm change. At the moment, people aren't really interested in preserving their wealth. They're just making money. When that changes, and when people are actually interested in sort of saving their wealth, and sort of the risk factors there are high enough, that is when things start to change. Because at the moment, too many people are interested in, if they are buying gold, they're buying in ETFs. There's only that 0.2, that very low cost bar ETF. There's loads of other sort of low cost vehicles. Once people start sort of appreciating the sort of the extra premium involved, once that's seen as sort of a no-brainer, that's when everything changes. When everyone sort of realises the sort of benefit in actually getting physical instead of actually just being an unsecured creditor.
Right. It's that game theory in the sense that all these people trading for day-to-day profits realize, what, I need to make sure that I keep this wealth in a real physical position, and I'll pay a small premium to do so. Yeah,
exactly. It's changing the mindset of, instead of trying to make a few percent here, a few percent there, let's try and save 95% of what I've actually got. So I think it's going to be difficult, and I'm not entirely sure how soon it's going to happen. Like I said, I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't know how you feel, but I feel like with especially the internet age, people are kind of almost desensitized by everything that's happening. You see Libya and all the stuff happening. It's almost every day that something's happening where people are just sort of looking at it like, and they're sort of, okay, it's another day, something's happening. So it's almost like they're becoming sort of desensitized by the information. But I think eventually something will happen where it will flip the switch, where they'll go, okay, I think I need to actually get the physical in my hands. So,
right.
When that happens, everything will change. And this is another perspective for the banks, because like most of the banks that hold these accounts in London or elsewhere, that extra cost to have physical is just seen as unnecessary. They have a budget, and the extra sort of 5% to have physical and pay daily storage, they're just not going to do it. So once the fear is greater than that extra 5% to have physical, that's for me when it changes.